Welcome to my presentation. I'm going to start by walking you through a newer cyber attack directed against Wi-Fi, which I find very creative and fascinating. I chose this attack because it kind of illustrates the huge impact that a Wi-Fi breach can have to a large organization. And then I'm going to finish up by summarizing some of the most common Wi-Fi threats and mitigations today. So first, a quick introduction to the attack that was titled the Nearest Neighbor Attack. It was discovered on February the 4th, 2022, just before the Russian-Ukraine war. The target was a major American company located in Washington, D.C. that worked on some projects related to the war, but their name hasn't been published yet. The attack was detected by the company's security firm Volexity because an alert was triggered on the company's system. The alarm basically showed the server was compromised with activity in the root directory where the attackers were zipping and exporting sensitive data. We also do know that the attack was carried out by a Russian threat actor called APT28 in public speaking, but with the more sophisticated name Fancy Bear. It's possible to quite accurately link the group to the attack based on the exploits and TTP they used, but more precisely based on what and who they were targeting. The purpose of the attack was to collect information about employees and projects related to Ukraine. This slide summarizes the full attack, but it has a lot of info, so I'm going to walk through it slowly, step by step. First, we have our attacker, which we assume is located somewhere in Russia. Then we have our primary target, the company I introduced in the previous slides, which we call A. And then we have two smaller companies, B and C, that are secondary and used as a part of the attack to hit the main target A. So the first things the attacker did was to perform a password spray aimed against all of A's internet-facing services. Basically, they tried to brute force all available login forms they could reach from the internet. And they actually succeeded and acquired credentials for 3 of the company's user accounts. But they couldn't log in because all the company's internet-facing services had MFA activated. So instead, the attackers got creative, changed strategy, and went for the Wi-Fi. They attacked a nearby company B, which was a smaller company with less security. And they actually succeeded breaking into B's VPN because they didn't have MFA and thereby gaining access to the internal network. Then they moved along B's wired network until they discovered the company's Wi-Fi adapter. And from there, they ran a PowerShell script which scanned for nearby Wi-Fi devices. And that's how they discovered A's Wi-Fi network. They successfully breached A's Wi-Fi and gained access to their network. And this was possible because A used enterprise Wi-Fi with a radio server and certificates. Basically, the employees used the same credentials to log into their workstations as they used to log into their Wi-Fi. So attackers logged into the company's Wi-Fi with the credentials they stole from the first password spray. And once the attackers had access to the internal network, they moved further into the system and exported sensitive data. And in February 2022, the attack was detected when an alert was triggered. The security company Volexity did do remediation right away and reset user accounts on both company A and B and implemented further security measures. So they pushed the attackers out of the system and didn't hear anything from them again, at least for a month. Because a month later, another similar alert was triggered, showing the attacker was right back on the network and deep into the system. This time, the attacker had compromised the Wi-Fi network of another smaller company, C. But they changed their strategy due to the security measure implemented from the first attack. So this time, they compromised A's guest network, which should be isolated from the corporate network. But it wasn't. So the attacker jumped from the guest network to the internal network and thereby bypassing MFA. Further remediation was inserted and the attacker was pushed out of the system and haven't been seen since. For piecing the puzzles, then it took almost a month and a half before investigators got the full picture of the attack, simply because they didn't focus on Wi-Fi. In their defense, this was a highly advanced attack that just couldn't be carried out by anyone. And it's also unknown how much damage was caused, because the attackers was really good at covering their tracks. But the company has admitted that sensitive data was stolen, and I'm guessing it was a lot. So why is this attack relevant? I think it is because it shows the impact a Wi-Fi breach can have, which is almost comparable with a phishing or malware attack. It's also interesting that the attackers used and exploited smaller companies with lower security as a kind of geographical springboard to hit their main target. And finally, it's worth noting that EDR detection was completely avoided in the beginning because no malware was deployed. I think it illustrates that the company's detection strategy wasn't prepared for Wi-Fi attacks. All this speaks to the fact that Wi-Fi security is generally downgraded, which was clear as the company had multi-factor authentication implemented on pretty much everything except Wi-Fi. So what is the main threats and mitigations against Wi-Fi? Well, first of all, we should remember that Wi-Fi is everywhere and everybody can listen within distance. And currently the record for catching a Wi-Fi signal is 400 kilometers. So today, distance is no longer a legit security mechanism. Research also shows that 75% of all Wi-Fi users worldwide uses a password-based WPA2 protocol, and only 3% uses the newest protocol, WPA3. So the WPA2 protocol is over 20 years old, has a lot of weaknesses, and is simply designed for a different time. The biggest problem is these deauthentication attacks, which basically means that I can buy a cheap Wi-Fi scanner and say to a client, "Hey, I'm your network and now you gotta leave it," while showing them a fake driver's license they cannot question. The only way we can protect ourselves against this is by implementing protected management frames, which introduces an integrity check between the client and the access point and thereby prevents spoofing. Another thing to keep in mind is that many users still use either the default password or a weak Wi-Fi password. Ideally, we should always be using at least 12 characters passwords, including 3 parameters, with a combination of numbers, letters, and symbols. It's also a fact that WPA2 uses the Wi-Fi password for data encryption for all users, and that's pretty wild. So it's very important to implement other security features and defense in depth. That means encrypting the application layer, where we should always be using TLS and VPN, which encrypt and tunnels our data on the internet. But I think there's hope out there, because the WPA3 protocol is very strong and you can no longer throw clients off networks, sniff the handshake, and crack the Wi-Fi password. It enforces protected management frames, has stronger encryption where the keys are no longer derived from the Wi-Fi password. Basically everything is better, but unfortunately a lot of IoT and older devices still doesn't support the protocol. So pushing the manufacturers to use WPA3 is key in the future. Any questions?